Page in Chattanooga, it is becoming more and more apparent that there were no real red flags that could have actually tipped off authorities and possibly saved the lives of those 5 brave servicemen. Let's bring in Steve Rogers. He is a retired lieutenant detective for the Nutley, New Jersey Police Department and a former member of the FBI Terror Task Force. Thank you so much for talking to us. You know, for someone like Abdulaziz, who didn't have a criminal record, he never made it known to anyone that he had the intentions that he did. How are authorities supposed to go about tracking these types of homegrown terrorists?
Julie, they're going to have to change the strategy on how they're collecting intelligence and information. And I've said this quite often.
Right.
They have to start concentrating on sharing information and obtaining information from cops out on the street, those beat cops, the cops that know everyone who lives in a neighborhood, who's working in their communities. They're the ones that can provide critical and vital information. There's where you're going to find the red flag.
Let's talk about this rap sheet that this guy has. 24 years old, young guy, didn't have much of a rap sheet. He did have a DUI, which is interesting, despite being a devout Muslims who are very devout don't normally drink alcohol. There's also new information on why the gunman lost his job back in 2013 at an Ohio nuclear plant. A federal official is saying that Abdulaziz tested positive for drugs. So if you take the alcohol and the drugs and throw it into the mix, it does make it a bit harder, I would imagine, to figure him out from a religious standpoint, does it not?
Oh, yeah, it sure does. But the key to this was the trip to Jordan. Missing for 10 months from his neighborhood, from his friends. Who would have known that? Close friends, neighbors, and the local cops. So, sure, you got to get a totality of information together, piece it together, and then you're going to figure out there's something wrong here.
But you could also argue that he was part Jordanian and that a visit to Jordan, an ally of the U.S., and going to the Middle East wouldn't necessarily be unusual for someone like him.
People talk. I'm sure he's spoken to people. I'm sure he's on his internet. He's communicated with people. And when people talk, and they usually do, even those with ill motives, that's where you're going to get that red flag.
Here's what I want to know. His father was investigated previously for possible terror ties. I don't know about you, but I don't have anyone in my family or any friends that have ever been investigated for possible terror ties. Shouldn't entire families be looked at more closely if one of your relatives is being investigated as a suspect of a possible terror tie? He was cleared, but nonetheless investigated.
That's the first thought that crossed my mind when you made that statement. Absolutely right. If the father has terror ties, and we know
suspected,
yes,
and it turns out he was cleared, but
yes.
How do you become a suspect of something like that? Obviously, you're dabbling in something.
Well, absolutely, and you do know that a lot of Mideastern families, they have very close ties together. I think more so than a lot of other countries, and they're loyal to their family members. So yes, you need to keep an eye on every member of that family up to a point.
Okay, I want to talk about his blog. On July 13th, he posted authorities had now been looking into his social media use. So he was actually blogging about the fact that people were watching him. That seems like a red flag to me, because I'm not worried about people reading my social media or my Facebook or Twitter posts, because I'm not engaged in any illegal activity.
It is a red flag, but remember, the White House and the Justice Department have hindered the ability of the NSA and intelligence agencies to do their job. There's been this big issue over surveillance, electronic surveillance,
Absolutely.
profiling, and the result of that is the hindering of law enforcement to do their job. We've got to increase surveillance.
Wiretapping, that is a huge.
Absolutely.
The Patriot Act.
And stop the politically correct nonsense about religious profiling, racial profiling. It's criminal profiling. In this case, it's profiling individuals that may very well be trying to take this country down.
Or could potentially be related to someone who might have ill will toward the West. His father was a suspected, terror tie, had a suspected terror tie. That cannot be ignored.
It cannot. And it's going back to that local cop mentality. You know, when we're on the streets and we get a little piece of information, it usually leads to something bigger. So I would hope that the Department of Homeland Security is going to start funneling money down to local police departments. Look, New York, Los Angeles, big cities, they've got the training. But Julie,
they can hide out in smaller towns, and that's where a lot of the focus
But I challenge anybody to ask the local cop, what do you look for? And that local cop's going to say, I don't have an idea.
Yeah, better training.
Yes.
You need money to do that.
Absolutely.
Steve Rogers, great to have you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Greg.